next to the building, thank you. There's smoke pushing up, RPM. RPM.
January the 17th, 1994, 4:31 a.m. A 6.8 magnitude earthquake shattered the San Fernando Valley, northwest of downtown Los Angeles. It was called the North Ridge Quake. In a matter of seconds, the city was brought to its knees. 57 died, thousands were injured, countless more were left homeless. The property damage was estimated at $30 billion.
Right beneath the city of Los Angeles, a very heavily populated area, we saw such tremendous destruction when an earthquake strikes right in the heart of a city.
We know that earthquakes create a lot of events that are correlated. That is, if you have major damage to buildings, it's likely that you also have damage to maybe surrounding utilities.
There were surprises from the Northridge earthquake. It was assumed steel buildings, especially taller buildings, would bend with the shaking of the ground, but that no breaking of the steel would occur.
The devastation caused by the Northridge quake proved those assumptions were wrong. But what if that quake had only been a prelude to a second, even more devastating seismic event? What if, on January the 24th, 1 week after Northridge, an earthquake 60 times stronger had struck Los Angeles? The location was Southern California, just a week to the day after the North quake. The morning rush hour had begun. Commuters crowded alternate routes beside crippled freeways. Others filled special mass transit trains. Hundreds of thousands were headed for work in downtown Los Angeles, unaware the Earth was about to move again. Then, at 9:01 a.m. on January the 24th, 1994, a 7.8 struck Los Angeles along the most heavily populated corridor on America's west coast. Southern California was thrown into a seismic abyss.
Yeah, we got it. It's a 7.4.
It was the worst natural disaster in US history. In less than a minute, the region was hit with the heaviest destruction seen on US soil since the Civil War. Emergency relief efforts, already mobilized for Northridge victims, were crippled when telephone and news communications crashed.
I'm afraid it's pretty bad. Yeah.
From the epicenter in Culver City, waves of destruction rippled out at a speed of 4.5 kilometers a second, releasing nearly a megaton of deadly energy, 80 times the power of Hiroshima's atomic blast, all across Los Angeles and Orange counties.
Rico, have you got that thing ready to go? We're wired?
Traffic reporter Tony Hines provided America with the first accounts from deep within the quake zone.
About 1 hour ago, I'm sure you all know, we were hit by a tremendous earthquake, a 7.8, a 7.4, at least they're saying. Stay off the freeways, stay away from the ramps. Many sections of freeway are going to be undrivable.
Communications were horrendous. I mean, they were absolute chaos. Nobody knew anything. You had rumors flying, half-truths, double counting about fatalities.
What was going on at the station?
Well, yeah, the station was desperate to get a crew into downtown, and, well, the traffic helicopter was in the air nearby, so I was it.
California Congressman Tom Monroe was in Washington at the time.
It was probably one of the hardest days of my life. I was here. My family was 3,000 miles away. We'd only heard that it was bad, very bad. I remember it was a little after noon, and I tried calling. I didn't know whether they were alive or dead. And I tried the Federal Emergency Management Agency, I tried FEMA, I tried the networks. I couldn't get through. It was impossible.
The only way to get across the city was by helicopter. 300 highway structures and overpasses lay in ruins. Already crippled by the Northridge quake, LA's web of freeways were torn to ribbons of tarmac. On the ground, many buildings were reduced to rubble, while some reinforced structures were damaged but remained standing. Major insurance companies braced themselves for massive losses. With a population of more than 15 million, the LA region was the equivalent of the fourth largest state. Never had such destruction been inflicted on so many people. Fires were everywhere and quickly spreading out of control. The ports of LA and Long Beach, the commercial gateway for 50% of America's imported Asian goods, were enveloped by oil fires. For the first time in history, all electrical power in Orange and Los Angeles counties was lost. 95% of all telephone communications were also knocked out. It was as though Southern California had simply disappeared from the map.
There's a lot of confusion about the Richter scale. We're talking about a tremendous earthquake here. I mean, the second largest city in America was completely shut down, first time ever. And all we could do was watch it on television. That's all we could do. And the phones here just went crazy because everybody who had a relative or friend in Los Angeles called this office. And at one point, the president's office called to just talk about relief efforts, and one of my aides put him on hold. So to give you some idea, it was insane.
One of the problems in an earthquake is that you have fires starting at the same time, your transportation systems go out, you have people without information, water is disrupted, which means that many places are really on their own in terms of taking care of themselves.
You're going to have to handle this situation there for a long time by yourself because there's no paramedics available.
Despite a state-sponsored earthquake preparedness campaign just a year earlier, the quake caught most people completely by surprise.
My company, which does public opinion surveys by telephone, interviewed 600 Californians, and we asked them about their preparation for a major earthquake. We were surprised to find that 3 out of 5 told us that they had no idea they were supposed to get under a strong table in the event of a major quake. And then we found that 1 out of 3 said they had absolutely nothing in their house in terms of preparation for an earthquake emergency. But perhaps the most disturbing finding we had in that survey was that in the work, people had no training, no equipment, no idea what would happen or what they should do in the event of a major shake.
Stand back, sir. Thank you.
In the Great LA Quake, at least 2,000 people were killed when they rushed out of high-rise buildings in panic, while those remaining inside the buildings, especially on higher floors, endured endless seconds of terror. By taking shelter under his desk, Donald Tuttle may have saved his own life.
I felt literally like a 7-year-old kid back in grammar school.
Years later, he's still haunted by the scene he witnessed on the street below his office window.
What must have happened was they panicked, left the building, ran out, went across the street, were hit by fallen debris. It was an incredible sight, one that I'll never forget.
From Beverly Hills to Anaheim, 300,000 buildings were destroyed or heavily damaged by the Great LA Quake of 1994. Rumors spread that dozens of high-rise office buildings had literally been shaken apart.
Well, I filed a report from what was left of the Syntrex building. Now, this was a 30-story structure that just practically collapsed. The cameraman had to put a radio mic on me because I could not hold the microphone, the regular microphone in my hand without it shaking.
The Syntrex building has nearly fallen over. As you can see, there is almost nothing left of this building. Those that were saved were rescued by co-workers who refused to panic. 1,000 people are trapped, alive or dead, we don't know, inside this enormous heap. This is only one of many disaster sites in the downtown area on this, Los Angeles' darkest day.
As night fell, the emergency relief workers were frantically trying to keep up with an endless flood of victims. At the same time, all 4 downtown hospitals had to be evacuated because of damage. Local TV correspondent Sally Engelman became America's prime source for reports on LA's growing health crisis.
432. Nearly 50% of all hospital beds in LA County have been lost to the quake, and estimates of victims requiring hospitalization range from 35 to 50,000. Here at St. Mark's, the hospital is operating on emergency power. All surgery rooms are filled, and in the parking lot, doctors are currently deciding and trying to maintain patient comfort for those who cannot be saved.
They might get the light. Hey, people need to back up. Back up now.
I mean, it was just incredible. We found out later antiseptics, bandages, antibiotics, anesthetics.
And for the citizens of Los Angeles, the terror was only beginning. As night fell on the earthquake zone, it seemed the suffering wouldn't end. Hundreds of fires billowed out of control, many set off by severed gas lines in buildings with unbraced foundations. Fires ranged from Santa Monica to Newport Beach and throughout the San Fernando Valley. From Burbank to Culver City, LA's film studios were left to burn. The city's sports stadiums were also damaged beyond repair.
When you have an earthquake like we had, it's just impossible for us, the fire department, police department, emergency responders to be everywhere because there are so many problems occurring, so many people's lives that are at stake. And so what happens is the normal routine, I've seen it before, it happened here again, is where your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers are actually the ones that help you get out of some of these situations. People are not helpless. If they have a little bit of training and know what to do, they can save lives, they can save property.
In many areas, the fire department's civilian training program provided LA's only defense against the inferno. That night, teams of volunteers saved countless lives and entire neighborhoods with their fast and courageous action. Fires and the earthquake damaged 25% of the residential property in the quake zone. Many refused to abandon their homes. Relief efforts grew tense. More National Guard troops arrived to maintain order and deliver food and water street by street. The day after the quake, fires suddenly exploded out of control when hot, dry Santa Ana winds swept across the city. Firefighters were forced to retreat. The intense blaze threatened to engulf all of Los Angeles. The winds fueled a mile-long inferno, sparked by fallen power lines in the hills above Hollywood.
We're still having a little trouble getting into 94 on a quarter.
Have a major gas leak explosion. Lower Canyon and fire.
We can't see anything though. We can't, everything is out over here.
We do not have enough units to respond to this right now.
It appears that we have over 200 fires burning right now. And yeah, we've got a major problem now. We've got that fire coming down through the brush. Several hundred homes in its way, and we're trying to get resources over there to give it a stop. But what we're going to try to do with it is try to stop it at a freeway. It's about the widest place we can get at it, and we hope we can stop it there. If we don't, it's going to go all the way through the hills and probably destroy many, many homes.
That night, a wall of flames fell from the hills, consuming the City of Angels, block by block.
Everybody out of the building, but there is a gas leaking over there, really bad. Okay, what you need to do is just stay away from it right now. We are not coming out right now, okay?
Many believed the city's fate had been sealed long before the Great Quake of 1994. Years of budget battles depleted fire department resources. An emergency water supply system was proposed, but never funded, leaving Los Angeles vulnerable. And now, the spectre of a full-blown firestorm began to haunt Chief Borden and his men.
Yeah, evacuation is just about all we can do right now. We don't have enough fire engines out in the street to control all the fires, so we're getting the people out of the way and trying to make a stand where we can.
Has it been difficult to get people to leave?
No, not really. People are more than willing to leave because the fire is so intense.
Okay, we're going to get to later as soon as we can. Thank you.
We tried to find a vantage place to shoot some tape of all the people moving away from the fumes and the fire. As far as you could see were frightened people, and they were all running toward me.
Everything is on fire, everything is burning because the fire storm. And I get my little boy and my grandfather, and I grab some clubs and stuff, and we use the truck.
As 200,000 people raced for shelter from the blaze, the fire department made its stand along a stretch of the Hollywood freeway. On the night of January the 25th, the White House called a special press conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a brief announcement from the President, who is en route to March Air Force Base in California. His message reads, "My fellow Americans, tonight I ask you to pray with me for the people of Los Angeles. We now know that thousands have died from this terrible tragedy, but millions more have survived because they were prepared for the worst. If they can hear me tonight, be assured that help and support is on its way. In a few moments, the Los Angeles Fire Department, civilian volunteers, and other assisting departments will confront the leading edge of a near firestorm. Tonight we wish these courageous firefighters Godspeed. And meanwhile, our hearts go out to the survivors of this terrible quake."
The President's announcement came in around 10:15 that night. The fire department was massed along a mile-long stretch of freeway when this wall of flame, it must have been, Jesus thing must have been moving down on them at about 10 miles an hour. They spent the next 10 hours keeping the sparks shooting across the freeway from catching the rest of Hollywood on fire.
All that way out.
Yeah, Roger, Division. Task Force 89, we've got the west side clear, and we're moving to the south side.
But the fires turned deadlier still when a chemical plant in El Segundo became engulfed in flames. "21 firefighters were overcome and many exposed to noxious gases when an explosion sent a torrent of chlorine gas soaring into the night sky.
They lost 21 men. But they did it, they saved what was left of LA.
Many believed that the inferno would ultimately destroy the entire city of Los Angeles, but the fires were not the worst effect of the great LA quake of 1994. The fires consuming LA lasted for 7, but the reverberations lasted much longer.
Whoa, fire department! Fire department! Fire department, anybody in there?
Long before the cost of the damage could be assessed, world financial markets were in chaos, but speculators weren't waiting. As smoke still rose from the rubble, construction company shares shot up, while other industries plummeted. There was a run on electronic and media companies and bank stocks. Fears of astronomical losses in the insurance industry brought an emergency halt to trading of those stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. Wall Street held its breath. By March, insurance claims offices in Southern California were overwhelmed by frantic policyholders. 50% of Los Angeles had been destroyed or heavily damaged, and 18% of that had been insured.
Yeah, this is David.
After the big one hit, the big companies were facing up to $7–8 billion apiece in claims. I mean, they were already reeling from the Northridge earthquake, so you combine those two and the industry was facing a potential meltdown.
In Washington, debate broke out over emergency aid to LA. The country had been hit with a decade of disasters and costly relief programs, and taxpayers were frustrated over the rising cost to government. The quake that rocked San Francisco in 1989 had been the most costly in US history. Property damage was estimated at $10 billion. Across the bay, fires consumed the Oakland Hills in 1991. Then, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew slammed the Florida coast, causing $25 billion in losses. In the wake of Andrew came devastating blizzards in the Midwest, followed by catastrophic floods along the Mississippi. All of these natural disasters cost taxpayers close to $40 billion.
Well, see, yeah, in a lot of ways, the LA quake was like the last straw. And this money's got to come from somewhere, but it's almost impossible to budget this when you have 5 years of the kind of natural disasters that we've suffered in this country. Well, you take FEMA, for example. They're running on empty almost because they didn't know what hit them. And I'm running around with my damage estimates in one hand, my relief plans in the other, going from committee to committee, trying to find funding for this.
By March of 1994, the bills from Northridge and the Great LA Quake were mounting, and LA plunged deeper into recession. Hundreds of thousands lost their jobs. Many had to walk away from heavily mortgaged homes. California's banks and mortgage lenders were left with immense debts. Meanwhile, the nation's insurance companies were in a state of shock.
In every area of what we considered our financial services structure, there was panic. We go from a company that was on one day serving 20 million customers with assets of over $10 billion, that because of our obligations to pay the claims that resulted from the quake, we're a company with no assets. We've liquidated everything to meet our claims obligations. We don't have any asset base on which to sell insurance in the future.
3 months after the Great LA Quake, insurance losses soared to more than $120 billion. By April, roughly a third of the US property and casualty insurance industry faced total collapse.
You know, it's rather ironic. The economists were saying before the major earthquake struck, if it should happen, it's only going to be a drop in the bucket, even if it's up to $50 or $60 billion, no problem. But what they didn't count on was the effects in the market that actually having big major insurance companies go bankrupt.
During a period known as the 10 Days of May, scores of major insurance companies made it official. They were out of business.
This morning, owing to record claims arising from losses sustained in the earthquakes of Northridge and Los Angeles, State Home Insurance Company regrets that it can no longer meet its liabilities.
I have a question. Are you going to have money to finish paying claims?
We are right now working on that and hope to have answers soon.
The ripple effect now reached far beyond LA as Americans across the country lost their policies and the cost of insurance began to soar.
Millions of people across this country, outside of California, suddenly woke up one morning, had a small fender bender, and found out they had no car insurance. Had a little fire in the kitchen. Now they don't have any homeowners insurance. And thousands of other people were actually questioning, because of the information that was coming out of California, whether they had insurance or they didn't have insurance. So it didn't matter. If you lived in Texas or you lived in New York or Rhode Island, everyone was becoming a victim of the Los Angeles earthquake.
Over 100 national insurance companies filed bankruptcy. They stopped writing policies on everything, including homes and cars. So for quite a while, they weren't building new houses, they weren't buying new cars, because they just couldn't get insurance. So what could you do?
You've got to remember that when insurance companies are in so much trouble, it affects people all across America. I mean, it's not just the people in California who are affected by this. But of course, in California, you've got, well, like you've got the guy whose his car's in his neighbor's pool. You've got a small homeowner, say, with a big mortgage, whose all of his property's just been completely destroyed. And I mean, they needed to have their claims paid. They needed loans. I mean, we have a lot of work to do, because these people needed help.
The human cost of the great LA quake took time to determine. In the first days, medical workers set up makeshift morgues to deal with the bodies, as many hospitals were destroyed.
White, female, roughly 50, wedding ring.
875435.
Engagement rings, house keys, and fragments of driver's licenses were often the only means of identifying the remains of more than 10,000 victims.
Has this been hard on you?
Yeah, it's been very hard. We're here long hours. The bodies keep coming in. You know, you get that thought in your head that you pull back that blanket, and maybe it's someone that that I know. You know, that somebody on my street, a family, a relative, someone, and yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard. It affects you. It's in the back of your mind.
439.
There's been a rumor going around that we've just been dumping these bodies in a mass grave, and we don't really care. You know, we're just trying to bury them, and that's not true. We're doing everything we can to locate the next of kin. And I'd like to
and state officials made it a priority to ensure that relief workers avoided the use of mass graves. But television images like these were beginning to erode public confidence in the government's relief effort.
Okay, I got it.
To preserve the dead, relief workers used everything from refrigerated railroad cars to ice cream trucks. Caring for the living was another matter. From the first night of the quake, survivors banded together in makeshift camps, with everyone contributing what little they had homes. By the end of the first week, the National Guard had erected sprawling tent cities from Malibu to the San Fernando Valley, providing shelter for an estimated 800,000 Southern Californians. TV images showed a city in ruins, yet often the cameras caught scenes of kindness as survivors worked together to build a new life. In the tent camps, officials tackled problems from hygiene to simply getting people to eat what was available.
We bring in mass food of some sort, a lot of times surplus food that the federal government provides, and we find that it's rejected. People can be starving, but if it's not what their culture demands, they won't eat it. Simple as that.
In Washington, the Surgeon General warned that LA's entire water supply was vulnerable to a host of diseases, like those that plagued Mexico City after its 1985 quake. 3 aqueducts, the California, the Colorado River, and the Los Angeles, were the city's only source for water. They all ruptured in the quake. Water supplies from city reservoirs were also compromised.
There are some people who are drinking water which is to be used for washing only. A waterborne parasite is now preying on some of the tent camps here in Los Angeles. It's called Cryptosporidium.
The National Guard distributed bottled water to prevent a full-scale epidemic. But the greatest threat in the tent cities wasn't disease, but the fear of loss. Many families were separated, and information was scarce. Many people were still living in the tent cities in the summer of 1994. For some, after the stress of losing everything, life was becoming too much to bear.
Hello, Mr. Camp.
This man lost his entire family to the quake and refused offers of help from psychiatric social workers. Days after the quake, he continued to pretend the disaster never happened and walked 15 kilometers a day to a job he no longer had.
Well, Harry's one of the victims that we have in the camp here that's suffering from what we would call post-traumatic stress disorder. When a person has had some sort of traumatic experience, they go through a state of numbness which helps them to assimilate this.
In the first 6 months, the National Institute of Mental Health would document over 6 million cases of psychiatric disorders, from mild to dysfunctional, directly related to the disaster.
If you're looking at people remaining in these tent cities, you will start seeing many of the social dysfunctions that we would normally see, but in a superficial type of environment, which I think can be even more problematic.
And yet, amidst the hardship, the uncertainty, and the chaos, there was hope. Charitable contributions shot up as millions from around the world rallied behind Southern California. Adaptability in adversity was the difference between life and death. For the youngest survivors of the LA earthquake, born in the days immediately following the quake, help came from one of the most unlikely places. Because city hospitals were operating without electricity, many babies born were saved by the inventiveness of the train drivers.
Trainmen from Southern Pacific were able to park this diesel on a nearby spur. That engine now serves as the hospital's electrical generator.
The railroads came to LA's rescue in more ways than one. Trains brought in relief workers and supplies, but 2 weeks after the quake, there was still no electrical power. And many who could arrange housing elsewhere began to leave. Trains carried Southern Californians to stay with relatives and friends all across the country. By the summer of 1994, LA saw more people leaving than arriving for the first time in decades. In the months after the quake, the industry that made Hollywood famous made a tough decision. Movie and television production had supported LA with more than 350,000 jobs. But after assessing the quake damage, and despite Hollywood's tradition and mystique, the industry moved to Las Vegas.
For years, people bitched and moaned about the fees, the licenses, the permits, this guy, that guy that we had to put on the payroll. It was hard to shoot. And then the quake hit. Guys in Hollywood packed their trucks up, they packed up the offices, they went to Las Vegas and they started making movies there.
After the studios left the city, concerns over damage from the Great Quake were reignited in the financial markets, where disasters are measured in dollars and cents. The Tokyo Stock Exchange was uneasy over falling orders for Japanese products from the United States. Before the quake, the ports of LA were the first points of entry for 1 in 4 Japanese cars headed for US showrooms. Rushed across country, Japanese goods continued their journey to American markets and buyers in Europe. But months later, LA's ports remained closed. The price of Japanese goods rose sharply to cover the increased cost of shipping to ports like Seattle and Vancouver. As prices rose, orders fell. Already in recession, the Japanese economy faced its World War II. Crisis was a word Wall Street tried to avoid, but losses were mounting. After the 10 days of May, when 1/3 of the insurance industry collapsed, the crisis on Wall Street finally happened. The combination of events was just too much to bear, and Congress had to act. The vote to bail out the insurance industry evoked strong emotions. Hundreds of thousands of jobs were at stake.
And we can prove to them that we're able to respond to their needs.
It is pro-growth, pro-housing, pro-savings.
It's a joke. We're not doing anything today. People are mad. You forgot about 650,000 people in this country who were put out of work.
The question in this bill today is, where does the money go?
And my position is that you ought to support what we're proposing here in the name of the President.
While the debate raged on, foreign investors began to take a second look at the American economy. The overseas analysts didn't like what they saw. Over $120 billion in stocks and bonds had been sold off by insurance companies to pay claims. And still, Los Angeles lay in shambles.
Interest rates were fluctuating wildly. The bond market was still in a spiral. And the best word I can use to describe what happened is it was utter panic.
All of a sudden, the investors overseas started pulling back and saying, whoa, wait a minute, maybe this is worse than we had figured. And so we better not go in there. We better wait. We better wait and see before we start putting any more money in. And that caused even more fear and more panic to happen within the stock markets back here in America, because the foreign companies were absolutely staying away. They weren't investing.
G7 leaders met today in Geneva to discuss growing economic tensions between the United States and Japan.
The Japanese and the United States lowered tariffs on automobiles to offset a slump in car sales in America and Europe. This as prices of auto and electronic stocks fell on the Tokyo Exchange for the third straight.
A nationwide poll reports 51% of the American public are angry with the government for its lack of a sound economic plan to deal with disasters like the Great Quake of '94. The results were published today in the...
And finally, the White House has endorsed a new bill that bails out the insurance industry, but demands more stringent quake-proof building codes before the president will sign off on the legislation.
Well, you see, so many people were affected by this quake, and it was like the SNL situation in the 80s. I mean, we had to save the insurance companies, just like we had to bail out all the savings and loan institutions, because, I mean, there's this big ripple effect. If the insurance companies are in trouble, then the pension funds get in trouble, and then people really start to worry. So when the stock market crashed, I mean, we knew we really had to do something. So we had to pass the insurance relief bill, and we did.
The rebuilding after the Great LA Quake of 1994 ultimately provided jobs for both skilled and unskilled workers. But the impetus to rebuild initially came from within. When the tent cities came down, thousands of people moved into energy-efficient domes like these. Ironically, the communities were built by and for people who had fallen on hard times long before the Great Quake, the city's homeless population. LA's first dome city, originally designated as shelter for the urban poor, was called Justiceville. Its founder was Ted Hayes.
You know, we believe in the city of Los Angeles, like everybody should believe in the neighborhoods. And we felt now was not the time to run. You know, homeless people are always looked at as we're wasteful, we are no credit to society and all that. Here was a chance for us to really show what we were made out of. And we stood our ground for this city, man. Just like this country was founded by homeless people, well, it was homeless people decided we're going to stay here and we're going to be an example. We're going to say we can rebuild this city.
Initially, after the earthquake, there was lots and lots of help and lots of hope. The rubble was cleaned off the streets, and optimism was apparent. And then there was a lot of concern about the fears of building the buildings the way they were built before, that they would come down again. So red tape became red tape, and red tape became red tape.
The federal logjam for rebuilding LA occurred as the world's foremost structural engineers and architects argued over new construction types. The new codes required additional malleability, and everything from sheer wall to more flexible construction was considered. By 1997, strict new building codes were finally determined, ensuring that the new LA would be known for its cost-efficient, quake-resistant structures. Los Angeles workers would soon occupy some of the safest office buildings ever built. And the city's construction industry would become known the world over for its innovative high-rise design.
No one would have ever figured what's happened in Los Angeles would actually happen after a major disaster. It's incredible.
But even after the film industry moved to Las Vegas, LA was still able to exploit its cinematic heritage. Tourism built renewed interest in LA, the city once known for its unique glamour. The $21 billion raised the year before the Great Quake was unmatched by the $10 million raised after. But the tours began to bring people back to LA.
Destroyed by the earthquake.
Yes, very interesting tour so far, and we're having a lot of fun, but it's a shock to see what happened here because of the earthquake.
It's amazing, really. Though, you know, in some ways I thought the damage to the building would be worse, but then you don't know what it's like inside, do you?
You have to realize that before the quake, that tourism was the second largest source of income for LA. Of course, after the quake, not many tourists wanted to go to LA for obvious reasons. So it was hard work, but finally tourists began to come back into the city, and when they did, Hollywood noticed that they were coming back. And I've always believed that movies belong in LA, that's their home. But they were over in Las Vegas, and that wasn't working out. It turned out that we needed them as much as they needed us, and what it finally took was my bill, which made LA a tax-exempt enterprise zone, and they came back, rebuilt the studios where they had been, and I think it worked out very well for everybody.
By 1998, the film industry had been lured back to Los Angeles, executives insisting their return had nothing to do with the generous tax incentives offered by the city. At the same time, Los Angeles began to cash in on a windfall from Asia's Pacific Rim. The region had become the world's economic powerhouse and wanted to sell more goods to the US. Companies from Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, Singapore and China were choosing LA for their US headquarters. Demand for office space and housing allowed Angelenos to rebuild their city into what would become, 10 years after the Great Quake, America's wealthiest commercial center.
For many years, Los Angeles had prided itself on being the gateway to the Pacific Rim. We just didn't anticipate that a 7.4 earthquake was going to be one of the catalysts that brought the Pacific Rim into an even closer business relationship with this city, but in fact it did.
The construction boom and Hollywood's return triggered LA's complete revival by the year 2000. Companies eager to trade with the Pacific Rim were fighting over real estate. Office workers who manned these corporate centers rode into town aboard new commuter monorails. By 2002, the new LA boasted the cleanest air of any American city. The Los Angeles quakes of 1994 directly affected the lives of some 12 million Southern Californians and countless more Americans, while nearly bringing about a worldwide financial panic. But out of the ashes came a newer, cleaner LA, with a redesigned disaster relief plan that's become the model for cities the world over. Although the Northridge earthquake caused considerable damage, it was nothing compared to what would have happened if a second, more devastating earthquake had hit LA. Predicting earthquakes has become a job of high risk and little gain. History sometimes gives a clue.
Multiple earthquakes can happen, and they have happened. In fact, in the winter of 1811 and 1812, 3 large, magnitude 7.5 and greater earthquakes struck the New Madrid area of the central United States in a period of 2 months. This area was remote at the time and not very populated. As a result, the fatalities were very low. The Mississippi River was said to flow backwards for 3 days, and 5,000 square miles of forest land had been leveled by the force of the shock. This earthquake could happen again, and if it did, the devastation would affect major cities like Memphis and St. Louis and dozens of smaller cities in the area.
Coincidentally, in 1812, there were also 2 very large earthquakes in Southern California, one on the San Andreas Fault and one in Santa Barbara. Were we to replay that historic sequence today, 5 very large earthquakes in urban areas, it would certainly change the course of American history.
We're not helpless in an earthquake. There are steps that can be taken by individuals, companies, agencies. But you can only get ready if you start taking these actions today and not put them off until tomorrow. Tomorrow is when the earthquake will occur.